Now, I'm going to start this video out with a question. Do you remember February of 2016 when it was announced that little-known actress at the time, Kelly Marie Tran, had just been cast in Star Wars Episode 8 and was apparently going to get a rather prominent role in the film? Well, then again, how could you not remember that? Because as soon as it happened, there was this huge swell of anger and backlash from a good portion of the fanbase, outraged that an Asian woman would be in a Star Wars film. Oh wait, you don't remember that happening? Well, that's curious. Well, what about back in early 2014, when Daisy Ridley was announced to be in the sequel trilogy, and we soon learned she'd be the new main protagonist of the whole trilogy? Certainly you can remember the screams of outrage from the man-babies during those dark times. Certainly you remember a lot of fans protesting the audacity of Disney and Lucasfilm to put a woman in Star Wars, and in the lead role, no less. No, that's not ringing a bell either. That's not something that actually happened. But that doesn't make any sense, because we know there are people who don't like Rose and Rey, the characters in Star Wars these two actresses play. But if no one seemed upset about them before the movies came out, wouldn't that almost imply that it was the characters people had an issue with, not the race and gender of the actresses playing them? But that can't be. That doesn't compute. Besides, the quality of the characters is irrelevant. All that matters is that they're in there for representation. And hence, anyone who doesn't like the character is obviously against representation and therefore is a bigot. Okay, so you might be wondering what's brought all this on. What's up with my little facetious opening here? Well, as you may know, the merchandise for Episode 9 is now available, and there are those who are upset that there is very, very little Rose Tico merchandise to be had. Furthermore, there are even those who believe there is some sort of conspiracy against her at play here, citing the fact that her image has actually been removed in some cases, that she had initially been on t-shirts, posters, and so on, but when they actually hit retail, she was gone. And quite honestly, it is a bit odd or curious at the very least, and the manufacturers have said the reason for this removal is that basically they hadn't received the final look of Rose in Episode 9 from Disney and or Lucasfilm, and what was on the shirt previously was essentially a placeholder, and when they didn't get the final look in time, they removed her and released the shirt or poster or whatever it is without her. Which, of course, was not the answer some people were looking for. And though I generally avoid Twitter like the plague, after reading an article about this controversy, I somehow let myself get sucked in, and I ended up reading a bunch of tweets about this last night. And many were, of course, comparing this to the whole Where's Rey thing that erupted with The Force Awakens, when many people felt like there wasn't enough Rey merchandise available before the movie came out. But of course, one of the reasons for that was much of the Rey merchandise was being held back until after the film came out because it featured her with a lightsaber, which at the time was a huge spoiler for the movie since all clues were pointing to Finn being the one who would be wielding a lightsaber in the film. Though of course, many people didn't buy that excuse and thought the character was intentionally being slighted. Which is kind of an odd assumption to make, that Disney and Lucasfilm wouldn't push their new main protagonist in a Star Wars trilogy with everything they've got, and then some. And I can only imagine some people felt they only wanted to pretend they were pushing female characters for the publicity, but didn't want to back it with merchandise that they didn't think would sell. Though of course others, now after the fact, think that the only thing they've ever wanted to do with the sequel trilogy is push female characters, but I'll delve more into these contradictory viewpoints in a little bit. Anyway, like with Rey's merchandise from The Force Awakens, I suppose it's possible something similar is happening here with Rose, that much of her merchandise is being held back until after the film because it'll involve a spoiler somehow. It's also possible that the excuse given is genuine, that for whatever reason, Disney and Lucasfilm didn't get the image of her from the new movie to them in time, so they just removed her from the shirt instead of keeping the placeholder there. Or who knows, maybe she's not in the film all that much. Maybe J.J. Abrams didn't find a significant place or role for her, much like Rian Johnson didn't seem to find a significant place in Episode 8, or any at all, for some of the things he'd introduced in Episode 7, like the Knights of Ren, for example. Maybe Rose will be killed off early on, as some type of motivation for Finn, who knows? I suppose it's also possible that the company removed her from the shirt because they thought it would sell better without her, and are now trying to backtrack when they were called on it. But there is one theory out there about this that some on Twitter presented that I can safely say is dead wrong, and one I'm absolutely stunned to find some seem to actually believe. That being that Disney is removing Rose from the merchandise and giving her a small role in the film to appease the racist and sexist portion of the fanbase, as they called them on Twitter. And I found this funny, if that's even the right word for it, for many different reasons. First of all here, there's no way Disney and or Lucasfilm would ever try to appease any fan who was truly racist and or sexist. I honestly don't know how anyone would even think that Disney would cater to actual racism. Just blows my mind to see how many people thought this. Second, and it's going to go along with my little spiel at the start, but a vast majority of the fans who didn't like Rose in The Last Jedi didn't like her because they didn't think she was a very good character. There's nothing more to it than that. Sure, some people attacked her personally on social media, but guess what? Any real Star Wars fan, even those who despise the character of Rose Tico, utterly condemn such behavior. And a few asshats on social media who attack an actor for a role they play in a film are idiots and don't deserve the time of day, period. And they certainly do not represent every fan who didn't like The Last Jedi or didn't like the character of Rose Tico in particular. Because, and this may blow the mind of some, but even though I personally don't really like Rose Tico all that much, the character, I do like Kelly Marie Tran, the actress. From everything I can tell, she seems like a delightful young woman, and I have nothing but good things to say about her, and I wish her the absolute best with her career going forward. But that's because I can and do separate the character from the actor. If I say something bad about Rose Tico, it's not meant to be criticism on Kelly Marie Tran. And it's sad how many people want to purposely conflate the two just to get angry about something or to make the worst possible assumption about people who do criticize her. And what I find craziest about this whole situation, and it's what I started to touch on earlier, is that the people who are somehow afraid that Disney and Lucasfilm are going to give in to the haters, or the ones they think of as a racist and sexist, and that's why Rose is not featured on the merchandise or won't be in much of the movie, don't realize that on the other side of the fence, many people feel the only thing Disney and Lucasfilm care about is putting more diversity into Star Wars. And despite what you may have been led to believe, or for some reason want to believe, the reason why this push for diversity concerns some fans isn't because they don't want women or minorities in Star Wars. It isn't because they're horrible, bigoted people who only want to watch movies with white men in them. It's because their main concern in regards to Star Wars is just Star Wars. It's the characters and the stories, not what race and gender everyone is. And as I've said before, don't confuse apathy for objection. Just because someone doesn't feel as strongly as you do about something doesn't mean they disagree with or are against you. Hell, a lot of Star Wars fans would love a movie or show that didn't even have any humans in it, that all the characters were instead just aliens. And that's because, for a lot of fans, the race and gender of the human characters is one of the least interesting or important aspects to them. And though some will want to take that as a negative somehow, what I'm trying to say is that they don't care all that strongly what race and gender the humans in Star Wars are. So make them as diverse as you want, and they won't bat an eye as long as they're just good characters. Not to mention, it makes absolute sense within the context of the story, considering humans are the most prominent species in the Star Wars galaxy and they've settled everywhere across it, that humans would come in all shapes, sizes, colors, and so on. So by all means, show us that. Again, it makes sense and fits the story, and no real Star Wars fan would try to argue against that. Yet, do please try to balance that by giving us some cool alien characters every once in a while. Because one of my biggest gripes with the sequel trilogy is it feels like we're in a galaxy full of humans that just so happens to have some aliens, not in a galaxy of many different species, which humans happen to be one of. And maybe the real crazy part about the current state of the Star Wars fanbase is so many people are fighting a battle over something they'd actually agree on if they just stopped and listened and tried to understand the other side. Because though I and many other fans don't want to see Star Wars used just as a vehicle for diversity, we have absolutely no objection to it. None. In fact, as I was just saying, any fan is going to gladly welcome it, as long as you don't forget those alien species. I mean, if we're going for diversity, let's go all in and make sure other species are represented too. But seriously here, to anyone watching this who thinks the fanbase is just rife with terrible, bigoted, horrible people, I ask you to not just assume the worst if a quote-unquote diverse character isn't welcomed with open arms by some. Do consider the crazy possibility that maybe people really just don't like the character, that it has absolutely nothing to do with whoever might be playing that character. Again, I'm not a huge fan of Rose, but I certainly don't blame or hate Kelly Marie Tran for that. Instead, I place all the blame squarely on the shoulders of that terrible, useless human being known as Roundhead Ruin Johnson, who created and wrote her in the first place. And I say that as a joke, because I'm also curious to know how many people would be willing to jump to his defense. Why we get so up in arms when a young Asian woman is attacked, but no one gives a damn when someone attacks an old white guy. I would think we should look at both of them as human beings who don't deserve abuse for their involvement with a fictional film franchise. Yet I'd wager that, overall, Rian Johnson has been attacked far more than Kelly Marie Tran has. That's just something for you to think about. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about any or all of this. Do you think there's some nefarious plot by Disney to wipe away Rose? Or maybe you think J.J. Abrams is going to more or less ignore her because a lot of his ideas got ignored by Rian Johnson, and turnabout is fair play. Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.